Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're diving into something I think you're going to find pretty fascinating. Changing your habits, creating a new you, all that good stuff. And you've given us some interesting material to work with, including some excerpts from Dr. Joe Dispenza's book, Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. So we're going to be exploring some pretty big ideas here. Neuroscience, quantum physics, even a little bit of spirituality.
Yeah, Dispenza's work is all about making those connections, showing how those seemingly different fields actually intertwine. And he suggests that we can make some pretty lasting personal changes by really understanding the connection between, our mind, our body, and what he calls the quantum field.
Okay, so let's start there, the quantum field. What exactly is that? How does it relate to our thoughts and our feelings? I mean, it sounds a little bit out there like something from Star Trek.
Right. It might sound like science fiction, but it's actually rooted in some pretty solid quantum physics. Think of it like this. Imagine this vast ocean of energy where every thought, every feeling creates a ripple. And all those ripples, they interact with each other, influencing the reality we experience. Dispenza is suggesting that we're not just passive observers in this field. We're active participants, shaping our reality through our thoughts and our feelings and ultimately our actions.
So we're not just reacting to the world around us, we're actually co-creating it with this quantum field.
Yeah, that's the idea. And Dispenza points to a fascinating study by Dr. Leibovitz to support this concept. Leibovitz studied the effects of prayer on healing. But here's the twist. The group prayed for patients who'd already been hospitalized with sepsis years earlier.
Wait, so they were praying for people who were already sick years in the past? How could that possibly have an effect?
It's a head-scratcher, for sure. But here's where it gets interesting. The patients who were prayed for, they actually showed improvements in their health. And those improvements seemed to occur back when they were actually sick, years before the prayers were even said.
Okay, now that is mind-bending. It challenges our conventional ideas of time and cause and effect.
It does, and it raises some intriguing questions. If our intentions can seemingly influence events in the past, what does that say about the nature of time itself? Are we maybe more interconnected with a field of information that transcends our linear perception of time and space?
It makes you wonder about the potential we all have to influence our lives, even in ways that, we don't fully understand. But Dispenza also talks about how we get stuck in these habitual patterns that hold us back. He calls them the big three. Can you explain those a little further?
Sure. The big three are environment, body, and time. And they can trap us in these cycles of thinking and feeling that keep us anchored to the past, and that can really prevent us from creating the future we desire.
So it's like we're on autopilot, reacting to the same triggers, creating the same outcomes over and over, without even realizing we have other choices.
Exactly. But Dispenza offers a way to break free from that cycle. He points to historical figures like Gandhi, for instance, who were able to transcend the limitations of their environment by envisioning a different future. They didn't let their circumstances dictate their reality. They created a new reality through the power of their minds.
That's inspiring. But how do we actually rewire our brains to think beyond our current circumstances? I mean, is that even possible?
It might sound difficult, but there's fascinating research on the power of mental rehearsal. Studies have shown that simply imagining yourself doing something creates actual neurological changes in your brain, almost as if you had physically performed the action.
So by vividly imagining ourselves doing something, we can start to rewire our brains and make it more likely that we'll actually take those actions in the real world. That's powerful.
It is. What could you achieve if you consciously harness that power? What so-called impossible goal might become possible if you started to think beyond your current limitations?
It makes you wonder what we're all capable of achieving if we could break free from those self-imposed boundaries. But Dispenza also dives into how our bodies play a role in keeping us stuck too, right? It's not just our thoughts. It's about how our bodies react to those thoughts.
You're right. He talks about this intricate connection between our thoughts, our feelings, and our physical sensations. Every thought actually triggers a cascade of chemical reactions in the body, and that shapes our physical experience and ultimately influences our reality. Think about how a single thought can send your heart racing or make your palms sweat.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like when you're driving and something triggers a memory and suddenly you're flooded with anger and it's almost impossible to think clearly, like you're completely hijacked by that emotion.
Exactly. That's a perfect example of how powerful these mind-body connections can be. And Dispenza suggests that, get this, 95% of who we are by the age of 35 is actually subconscious programming. So basically, we're running on autopilot. driven by memorized emotions and past experiences.
So we might think we're making conscious choices, but really we're just reacting based on these ingrained patterns. It makes you question how much control we actually have.
It does raise some interesting questions. If so much of our behavior is driven by these subconscious programs, are our choices truly conscious? What aspects of our lives are being shaped by patterns we're not even aware of?
That's a lot to think about. It makes you want to become more aware of those patterns so you can start breaking free.
Yeah.
But there's another element to this too, right? Dispenza also talks about time. How does that fit into all of this?
It's fascinating how he connects time to our ability to change. He argues that our obsession with the past and future, it actually robs us of the power of the present moment.
That makes sense. We're always either dwelling on past regrets or worrying about what might happen, and we miss out on the richness of what's happening right now.
Exactly. And we get trapped in those cycles of anxiety and limitation. But Dispenza offers an alternative. He calls it living in the future now.
Living in the future now. What does that even mean? It sounds like a paradox.
It might sound counterintuitive,
Yeah.
but it's about shifting our focus and our energy from the worries of the past and future to the present moment and the possibilities within it. So Dispenza suggests that by vividly imagining and emotionally embodying our desired outcomes, we can actually start to change our present reality.
So it's about tapping into the power of our imagination and emotions to create a blueprint for the future we want.
Precisely. It's about shifting from a mindset of I'll be happy when to I'm creating happiness now by... He even shares a story about his daughter who wanted to spend a summer working in Italy.
Oh, yeah. I remember that. She didn't just daydream about it. She really immersed herself in the experience before it even happened.
Right. She imagined herself there, felt the emotions of being in Italy, even started learning Italian. Basically, she started living as if she was already there.
And she ended up getting that summer job in Italy.
It's a great example of how stepping out of linear time, and tapping into the infinite possibilities of the quantum field can actually help us manifest our desires.
It's like she bent reality to her will by fully embracing her desired outcome. What if we could all do that? What would happen if we truly believed in the power of our minds to shape our reality?
It's a powerful question to consider, and it leads to another key concept that Dispenza explores the difference between living in a state of survival and living in a state of creation.
Okay, those sound like two very different ways of being in the world. What are the key distinctions?
So living in a state of survival, well, it's being driven by fear, stress, scarcity. You're constantly on edge, reacting to perceived threats, feeling like you're not enough.
It's like being stuck in that fight or flight mode all the time, always anticipating the worst, feeling like you have to protect yourself from some, unseen danger.
Yeah, exactly. And this chronic stress, it keeps your nervous system on a high alert, depleting your energy and limiting your potential. But living in a state of creation, well, it's about being fueled by love, joy, and abundance.
So instead of being afraid and reactive, you're open, you're trusting, you're full of possibility. You're not just trying to survive, you're actively creating the life you want.
Yes. And Dispenza offers some compelling case studies to illustrate what this shift can actually look like in real life.
He talks about a man named Jose who had these really stubborn warts on his hand that wouldn't go away. He did a meditation where he surrendered his worries to a higher power, and incredibly, the warts vanished overnight.
It's a remarkable example of the body's innate ability to heal when we let go of stress and embrace a state of peace and surrender.
And then there's the story of Monique, who always struggled financially, felt trapped in a scarcity mindset. But then she made a conscious decision to shift her thinking to one of abundance.
And not long after that, she won the lottery.
These stories are so inspiring. They really highlight the power of aligning our thoughts, our feelings, our beliefs with our desired outcomes. But how do we actually make that shift from survival to creation? I mean, is it just a matter of thinking positive thoughts?
It's more than just positive thinking. It's about rewiring our brains and bodies on a fundamental level. And that's where meditation comes in. Dispenza believes that meditation is the key to unlocking our new selves.
So it's not just about relaxation and stress relief. It's about actually changing our brains and bodies.
Exactly. And his approach to meditation is very specific. It's about using focused attention and intention to create tangible changes in our lives. It's not about emptying your mind. It's about actively engaging with your mind to create a new reality.
That's fascinating. So how does his technique actually work? Walk me through it.
Well, he breaks it down into a 4-week program, starting with week 1, which focuses on what he calls induction. It's all about learning to relax the body and quiet the mind. Dispenza uses techniques like the water rising visualization to achieve this state.
Oh yeah, the water rising visualization. That's so powerful. It guides you to imagine like warm water slowly rising up your body, enveloping you in a feeling of peace and relaxation.
It's a simple yet effective technique for shifting your physiological state. And what's remarkable is you're achieving this shift, not through any external means, but through the power of your own mind.
It's like hacking your nervous system. So once you've mastered the induction phase, in week 1, what comes next?
Week 2 introduces the principle of recognizing and releasing. And this is where we start to really address those limiting emotions and thought patterns.
Okay, so how do we actually go about recognizing and releasing those deeply ingrained patterns?
He suggests starting by identifying the specific emotion you want to unmemorize. He gives examples like guilt, shame, fear, anger, sadness, the full spectrum.
So it's about being brutally honest with yourself about those emotional patterns that are holding you back. No more sweeping things under the rug.
Exactly. You have to shine a light on those unconscious patterns, bring them into conscious awareness. And then Dispenza suggests getting very clear about the thoughts and behaviors that are associated with that specific emotion. How do you typically react when you're feeling that way? What are the stories you tell yourself? What actions do you take?
It's like becoming a detective of your own mind, observing your thoughts and actions without judgment, uncovering those hidden patterns that are driving your behavior.
Precisely. You're cultivating a sense of self-awareness, and that's really crucial for transformation.
But recognizing those patterns is only half the battle, right?
Yeah.
How do we actually release those emotions once we've identified them? Is it just a matter of willpower?
Willpower can play a role, but Dispenza emphasizes something even more powerful: surrender.
Surrender. I think of that in a battlefield context, not personal growth. What does surrender mean in this context?
It's about acknowledging that we don't have to control everything. It's about letting go of the need to, to fix things or figure it all out on our own. And it's about surrendering our limiting emotion to a higher power, whatever that may mean for you.
So it's about trusting that there's a greater intelligence at work, a force beyond ourselves that can help us heal and transform.
Exactly. And this act of surrender, it can have profound effects. He even talks about some of the side effects of surrender: feelings of inspiration, joy, love, freedom, awe, gratitude, and a sense of boundless possibility.
That sounds much more appealing than clinging to those old negative emotions. It's not about suppressing those emotions. It's about transforming them into something more positive and empowering.
Exactly. It's about creating space for something new to emerge.
But I imagine it's not always easy to surrender, especially when those negative emotions feel so real and powerful.
It takes practice and commitment, for sure. It's like building a muscle. The more you work at it, the stronger you become.
So we've relaxed the body, we've quieted the mind, we've identified and surrendered our limiting emotions. What's next on this meditation journey?
Week 3 focuses on observing and reminding, two sides of the same coin that build on the previous week's work.
Okay, break that down for me. What does observing entail?
Observing is about becoming incredibly aware of your habitual thoughts and actions. Noticing those subtle cues in your body and mind that signal you're about to slip back into those old patterns.
So you're like a detective of your own mind, looking for clues that you're about to react in an unconscious way, before it even happens.
Exactly. And the more you practice this observation, the quicker you'll be able to catch yourself before those old patterns take over.
And reminding. What's that all about?
Reminding is about actively and consciously rejecting those old patterns. You're essentially reprogramming your subconscious mind by consistently reminding yourself of who you no longer want to be.
So it's about choosing a new identity for yourself, one that's aligned with your desired future.
You got it. It's about consciously choosing to step into a new way of being and then backing that up with your thoughts and your actions.
This all sounds incredibly powerful, but I have to admit, the idea of creating a whole new self feels, kind of daunting. Where do you even begin with something like that?
That's a great question, and it leads perfectly into week 4 of Dispenza's program, creating and rehearsing.
Okay, this is where we get to the really exciting part, envisioning our ideal selves and our lives.
Exactly. It's about using your imagination and your emotions to create a vivid and detailed picture of who you want to be and what you want to experience in this new reality.
So it's going beyond just setting goals or making a to-do list. It's about fully embodying your desired outcomes with all your senses.
Yes. You're using the power of your mind and body to create a blueprint for your future. And as you rehearse this new reality, your nervous system begins to accept it as possible.
It's like you're priming your brain and body for transformation.
Exactly. And this is where the concept of the quantum field comes back into play. Remember we talked about how our thoughts and feelings are energy, and that energy interacts with the quantum field, shaping our reality.
Yeah, it's like we're constantly sending out signals into that vast ocean of energy.
Right. So by creating a clear and compelling vision of our desired future, we're sending out a powerful signal to the universe. We're essentially declaring our intentions and inviting the universe to co-create with us.
It's like we're participating in the unfolding of our own destiny. But how do we actually rehearse a new self? Do we just sit and daydream?
It's more than just daydreaming. It's about actively engaging your imagination, your emotions, even your physical sensations. He suggests vividly imagining your desired future, feeling the emotions associated with it, and even physically moving your body as if you're already experiencing that reality.
So if you want to be a more confident speaker, for example, you imagine yourself giving a presentation. Feel the energy of the audience and even practice your delivery out loud.
That's the idea. The more senses you can engage in the rehearsal, the more powerful it becomes. Your brain and body, they start to believe that this new reality is not just possible, but it's inevitable.
But what about those pesky doubts and fears that inevitably creep in? How do you deal with those when they threaten to, derail your vision?
It's important to acknowledge those doubts and fears, but don't let them control you. Remember, you're rewiring your brain. And that takes time and effort. You have to be patient with yourself and trust the process.
So it's okay to feel a little uncomfortable or uncertain along the way.
Absolutely. Growth and transformation rarely happen in a straight line. It's a journey with twists and turns. Embrace the discomfort. It's a sign that you're pushing beyond your comfort zone and expanding your potential.
And the key is to just keep practicing. The more you rehearse this new self, the easier it becomes to embody it.
You got it. He emphasizes the importance of consistency and repetition. It's like learning any new skill. The more you practice, the more natural it becomes.
So let's say we've gone through Dispenza's 4-week program. We've mastered induction, recognizing and releasing, observing and reminding, creating and rehearsing. What's next? What happens after we've broken the habit of being ourselves?
That's a great question. And it leads us to what Dispenza calls the gap, the space between our old self and our new self.
The gap. That sounds intriguing. And maybe a little intimidating.
It can be both. It's like we've created this new identity, this new way of being, but we haven't fully stepped into it yet.
So it's like we're standing at the edge of a precipice, looking out at this vast and unknown landscape. We've let go of the old, but we're not quite sure what the new will look like.
That's a great analogy. And this is where things can get tricky because, well, the old self, it doesn't just disappear overnight.
So even though we've done all this work to rewire our brains and create a new identity, we still have to contend with those old patterns and habits.
Exactly. Those neural pathways, they're still there, and they're going to try to pull us back into the familiar.
So how do we navigate that gap? How do we ensure that we don't fall back into our old ways?
That's what we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive. We'll uncover his insights on how to bridge that gap and fully embrace our new selves.
We're back for the final part of our deep dive into breaking the habit of being yourself. And I'm really curious to hear more about this gap. It sounds like it could be a pretty vulnerable time in this whole process of, personal transformation.
Yeah, it can be. It's that in-between space. You've grasped the concepts, you've done the work, but you haven't fully integrated that new self into your everyday life. You're right. It's definitely a time when, you could be susceptible to falling back into old patterns.
So what are some signs that we might be slipping back into those old ways, even if we don't realize it at first?
It can be subtle. You might find yourself feeling, anxious or irritable, but you can't quite pinpoint the cause. Or maybe you notice that negative self-talk creeping back in, those old tapes playing in your head. It could even show up in your behavior, things like overeating or procrastinating, or even getting triggered easily by things that wouldn't have bothered you before.
So those old neural pathways, those ingrained habits are still kind of lurking in the shadows, waiting for a chance to, fire up again. How do we stay vigilant and catch ourselves before we fall back into those patterns?
Dispenza, he really emphasizes self-awareness. The more we cultivate a mindful awareness of our thoughts, our feelings, our behaviors, the quicker we'll be able to recognize those patterns when they're trying to resurface.
So it's about becoming a detective of our own minds, paying attention to those subtle cues that, might signal we're veering off course. But how do we develop that level of self-awareness? I mean, it seems hard to, observe our thoughts and actions objectively, especially when we're in the middle of, a really strong emotion.
It is. It's a practice, and it takes time. But that's where the meditation techniques we talked about, they really become valuable. They help us cultivate that muscle of self-awareness. The more we practice observing our thoughts and emotions without judgment, the better we become at recognizing those patterns before they take hold. It's like we create a little space between the thought or the feeling and our reaction to it.
So instead of just immediately reacting to, a wave of anxiety, for example, we can pause, observe it, choose a different response.
Exactly. We always have a choice. We might not be able to control the initial thought or feeling, but we can choose how we respond to it. We can choose to engage with those old patterns, or we can choose to create a new path.
And that's where our vision for our new self comes in, right?
Yeah.
We need to have a clear picture of who we want to be, how we want to show up in the world, so that we can, steer ourselves in that direction, even when things get tough.
You're exactly right. That vision, it acts as a compass, guiding us through the challenges, the uncertainty of transformation. When those old patterns try to pull us back, we can kind of anchor ourselves to our desired destination and make choices that align with that vision.
It's a powerful reminder that we're not just at the mercy of our past conditioning. We can actively create a new future.
Yeah.
But what about those times when we do, slip up? It seems inevitable that we'll fall back into old habits, at some point. Does that mean we failed?
No, not at all. Dispenza stresses self-compassion. Change is rarely a linear process. There will be bumps along the road. And when we stumble, the most important thing is to, acknowledge it without judgment, learn from it, and just keep moving forward.
That's reassuring. We don't have to beat ourselves up over those missteps. We can just acknowledge them, dust ourselves off, and get back on track. But Dispenza also talks about some external challenges that can arise, too, when we're going through this process of transformation. He mentions that the people in our lives, they might not always be supportive of our changes.
Right. He calls this the energetic gap. So as we change our energy, our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors, it can create a dissonance with people who are used to us being a certain way.
Because they're used to the, quote unquote, old us. And our new energy might kind of challenge their perceptions of who we are.
Exactly. And this can lead to all sorts of reactions. Some people might be, inspired by our transformation, and they might even start making changes in their own lives. But others might feel threatened or uncomfortable, and they might try to pull us back into those old ways.
That sounds tricky. How do we navigate those relationships while staying true to our own, path of growth?
It's not always easy, but he suggests setting clear boundaries, communicating our needs, with compassion and understanding. It's also important to remember we can't control how other people react to our transformation. All we can do is focus on our own growth and trust that the right people will stay in our lives.
So it's not about pushing people away. It's about creating healthy boundaries that allow us to evolve while still honoring our relationships. And sometimes those relationships might naturally change or fade as we continue to grow.
That's right. It can be sad to let go of relationships, but it's also a natural part of growth and evolution. It creates space for new connections that are more aligned with who we're becoming.
It's like we're shedding our old skin. And sometimes that means shedding certain relationships along the way. But on a more positive note, Dispenza also highlights the amazing possibilities that can open up when we successfully navigate that gap. He suggests that we can actually start to create a new reality for ourselves.
Absolutely. He says once we let go of the old self and we fully embrace that new self, we become like a magnet, attracting people, opportunities, experiences that are all in harmony with our new energy.
It's like we're stepping into a whole new world, a world that reflects our inner transformation.
That's a great way to put it. And in this new reality, we might start to see synchronicities, serendipitous encounters, unexpected blessings, flowing into our lives. It's as if the universe is conspiring to support our growth and expansion.
That's an incredible idea, that by changing ourselves, we can change our experience of the world. Well, this has been a truly fascinating deep dive into breaking the habit of being yourself. We covered so much. The science of the quantum field, the practical techniques of meditation, the challenges and triumphs of creating a new reality. I don't know about you, but I'm feeling pretty inspired.
Me too. It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you. And I think the key takeaway here is, you have the power to shape your reality. By understanding how your mind, your body, and this quantum field are interconnected, well, you can break free from those limitations and create a life that really reflects your deepest desires.
That's a powerful message to leave our listeners with. It's not about becoming someone else. It's about becoming the most authentic and empowered version of yourself. And that journey, it begins with taking a leap of faith, embracing the unknown, and trusting that you have the capacity to create anything you can imagine. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep creating, and we'll see you back here on the Deep Dive.